خبر یارم مانده از سفر و گمانین خبر هوای بله چه گرمن تبرم بالای کپر هوای بله چه گرمن تبرم بالای کپر دلبرم مکناز با گرمای بندر بساز دلبرم مکناز با گرمای بندر بساز اگه ناتونی بسازی تفرستون به شیراز اگه ناتونی بسازی تفرستون به شیراز پشت باب مولوی
English occultist, ceremonial magician, poet, philosopher, political theorist, novelist.
Hey, did you know you might get a big cash payout if you were in a car accident in the last year? Yep, even if you weren't driving. Just click the link around this video to see how much you can get. You answer 4 simple questions and it only takes 30 seconds. If you missed work or got hurt by a driver in the last year, you might be owed money without even knowing it. You could get thousands, maybe even more. Click the link now to find out. Over 25,000 people have gotten $15 billion without...
So I just want to let everybody know that there's no such thing as tonight or this afternoon when you're in the morning, because there's only the now. So it's lunchtime now. That means that there is no such thing as breakfast or dinner. If I say water, do you get wet, or do you say I just said water?
Years ago, Spellbook launched the very first generative AI copilot for lawyers. Today, we're launching Spellbook Associate. It's an AI.
February, tonight is where it'll be
So if you want, I could play something pretty interesting. It's about consciousness.
Yeah, nothing.
Okay. This is by a professor in Tokyo called D.T. Suzuki, or Dr. Suzuki. And Christians really like it because it pairs very well with Christianity and Christ consciousness.
Zen Buddhism, selected writings of D.T. Suzuki, read by Vincent Bagnall. Zen Buddhism presents a surface so bizarre and irrational, yet so colorful and striking, that some Westerners who approach it for the first time fail to make sense of it, while others, attracted by this surface, take it up in a purely frivolous and superficial spirit. Either response would be unfortunate. The fact is that Zen, as Dr. Suzuki demonstrates, is an essential expression of Buddhism, and Buddhism is one of the most tremendous spiritual achievements in human history. An achievement which we Westerners probably have not yet fully grasped. We have to remember how recent it is that we have sought out any knowledge of the East. Only a century separates us from Schopenhauer, the first Western philosopher who attempted a sympathetic interpretation of Buddhism, a brilliant and sensational misunderstanding on the basis of meager translations. Since then, great strides have been made in Oriental studies, but a curiously paradoxical provincialism still haunts the West. The civilization which has battered its way into every corner of the globe has been very tardy in examining its own prejudices by the wisdom of the non-Western peoples. Even today, when the slogan, "One World," is an incessant theme of Sunday journalism and television, we tend to interpret it in a purely Western sense, to mean merely that the whole planet is now bound together in the net of modern technology and communications, that the phrase may imply a necessity for coming to terms with our Eastern opposite and brother, seems to pass publicly unnoticed. There are many signs, however, that this tide must turn. I consider it a great stroke of personal good fortune to have stumbled, and quite by chance, upon the writings of D.T. Suzuki years ago. I emphasize the word personal here because I'm not a professional Orientalist, and my interest in Suzuki's writings has been what it is simply because these writings shed light upon problems in my own life. One proof that Zen does have a much-needed message for Westerners. Suzuki has steeped himself thoroughly in Chinese Buddhism, and the practical and concrete Chinese spirit probably provides an introduction to Buddhism, more congenial to the Westerner than the soaring metaphysical imagination of the Indians. I would agree with Suzuki when he holds that Zen is the living fact in all religions, East or West, or a little more modestly, that Zen touches what is the living fact in all religions. For however small the fragment of Zen that makes live contact with a Westerner, its influence is bound to work through, and he will never be quite the same again. In the beautiful words of the Master Hoyen, when water is scooped up in the hands, the moon is reflected in them. When flowers are handled, the scent soaks into the robe. William Barrett. The sense of Zen. Zen, in its essence, is the art of seeing into the nature of one's own being, and it points the way from bondage to freedom. By making us drink right from the fountain of life, it liberates us from all the yokes under which we finite beings are usually suffering in this world. We can say that Zen liberates all the energies properly and naturally stored in each of us, which are in ordinary circumstances cramped and distorted, so that they find no adequate channel for activity. This body of ours is something like an electric battery in which a mysterious power latently lies. When this power is not properly brought into operation, it either grows moldy and withers away, or is warped and expresses itself abnormally. It is the object of Zen, therefore, to save us from going crazy or being crippled. And this is what I mean by freedom, giving free play to all the creative and benevolent impulses inherently lying in our hearts. Generally, we are blind to this fact, that we are in possession of all the necessary faculties that will make us happy and loving towards one another. All the struggles that we see around us come from this ignorance. Zen, therefore, wants us to open a third eye, as Buddhists call it, to the hitherto undreamed of region shut away from us, through our own ignorance. When the cloud of ignorance disappears, the infinity of the heavens is manifested, where we see for the first time into the nature of our own being. We now know the signification of life. We know that it is not blind striving, nor is it a mere display of brutal forces, but that while we know not definitely what the ultimate purpose of life is, there is something in it that makes us feel infinitely blessed in the living of it, and remain quite contented with it in all its evolution without raising questions or entertaining pessimistic doubts. When we are full of vitality and not yet awakened to the knowledge of life, we cannot comprehend the seriousness of all the conflicts involved in it, which are apparently, for the moment, in a state of quiescence. But sooner or later the time will come when we have to face life squarely and solve its most perplexing and most pressing riddles. Says Confucius, "At 15, my mind was directed to study, and at 30, I knew where to stand." And this is one of the wisest sayings of the Chinese sage. Psychologists will all agree to this statement of his, for generally speaking, 15 is about the age youth begins to look around seriously and inquire into the meaning of life. All the spiritual powers until now securely hidden in the subconscious part of the mind break out almost simultaneously, and when this breaking out is too precipitous and violent, the mind may lose its balance more or less permanently. In fact, so many cases of nervous prostration reported during adolescence are chiefly due to this loss of the mental equilibrium. In most cases, the effect is not very grave and the crisis may pass without leaving deep marks. But in some characters, either through their inherent tendencies or on account of the influence of environment among their plastic constitution, the spiritual awakening stirs them up to the very depths of their personality. This is the time you will be asked to choose between the everlasting no and the everlasting yea. This choosing is what Confucius means by study. It is not studying the classics, but deeply delving into the mysteries of life. Normally, the outcome of the struggle is the everlasting yea, or let thy will be done. For life is, after all, a form of affirmation, however negatively it might be conceived by the pessimists. But we cannot deny the fact that there are many things in this world which will turn our too sensitive minds towards the other direction and make us exclaim with Andreyev in The Life of Man, "I curse everything that you have given. I curse the day in which I was born. I curse the day on which I shall die. I curse the whole of my life. I fling everything back at our cruel face, senseless fate. Be accursed, be forever accursed. With my curses I conquer you. What else can you do to me? With my last thought I will shout into your asinine ears, be accursed, be accursed." This is a terrible indictment of life. It is a complete negation of life. It is a most dismal picture of the destiny of man on earth. Leaving no trace is quite true, for we know nothing of our future except that we all pass away, including the very earth from which we have come. There are certainly things justifying pessimism. Life, as most of us live it, is suffering. There is no denying the fact. As long as life is a form of struggle, it cannot be anything but pain. Does not a struggle mean the impact of two conflicting forces, each trying to get the upper hand of the other? If the battle is lost, the outcome is death, and death is the fearsomest thing in the world. Even when death is conquered, one is left alone, and the loneliness is sometimes more unbearable than the struggle itself. One may not be conscious of all this and may go on indulging in those momentary pleasures that are afforded by the senses. But this being unconscious does not in the least alter the facts of life. However, insistently the blind may deny the existence of the sun, they cannot annihilate it. The tropical heat will mercilessly scorch them, and if they do not take the proper care, they will all be wiped away from the surface of the earth. The Buddha was perfectly right when he pronounced his fourfold noble truth, the first of which is that life is pain. Did not every one of us come to this world screaming, in a way, protesting? To come out into cold and prohibitive surroundings after a soft, warm, motherly womb was surely a painful incident, to say the least. Growth is always attended with pain. Teething is more or less a painful process. Puberty is usually accompanied by a mental as well as a physical disturbance. The growth of the organism called society is also marked with painful cataclysms, and we are at present witnessing one of its birth throes. We may calmly reason and say that this is all inevitable, that inasmuch as every reconstruction means the destruction of the old regime, we cannot help going through a painful operation. But this cold, intellectual analysis does not alleviate whatever harrowing feelings we have to undergo. The pain heartlessly inflicted on our nerves is ineradicable. Life
Hey, Jay, can you
is,
hear me?
after all, arguing a painful struggle. This, however, is providential, for the more you suffer, the deeper grows your character. And with the deepening of your character, you read the more penetratingly into the secrets of life. All great artists, all great leaders, and all great social reformers have come out of the intensest struggles, which they fought bravely, quite frequently in tears, and with bleeding hearts. Unless you eat your bread in sorrow, you cannot taste of real life. Mencius is right when he says that when heaven wants to perfect a great man, it tries him in every possible way until he comes out triumphantly from all his painful experiences. To me, Oscar Wilde seems always posing or striving for an effect. He may be a great artist, but there's something in him that turns me away from him. Yet he exclaims in his De Profundis, "During the last few months I have, after terrible difficulties and struggles, been able to comprehend some of the lessons hidden in the heart of pain." Clergymen and people who use phrases without wisdom sometimes talk of suffering as a mystery. It is really a revelation. One discerns things one never discerned before. One approaches the whole of history from a different standpoint. You will observe here what sanctifying effects his prison life produced on his character. If he had had to go through a similar trial in the beginning of his career, he might have been able to produce far greater works than those we have of him at present. We are ego-centered. The ego shell in which we live is the hardest thing to outgrow. We seem to carry it all the time from childhood up to the time we finally pass away. We are, however, given many chances to break through this shell. And the first and greatest of them is when we reach adolescence. This is the first time the ego really comes to recognize the other. I mean, the awakening of sexual love. An ego, entire and undivided, now begins to feel a sort of split in itself. Love, hitherto dormant deep in his heart, lifts his head and causes a great commotion in it. For the love now stirred demands at once the assertion of the ego and its annihilation. Love makes the ego lose itself in the object it loves, and yet at the same time, it wants to have the object as its own. This is a contradiction and a great tragedy of life. This elemental feeling must be one of the divine agencies whereby man is urged to advance in his upward walk. God gives tragedies to perfect man. the greatest bulk of literature ever produced in this world is but the harping on the same string of love. And we never seem to grow weary of it. But this is not the topic we are concerned with here. What I want to emphasize is this connection in this, that through the awakening of love, we get a glimpse into the infinity of things, and that this glimpse urges youth to romanticism or to rationalism according to his temperament and environment and education. When the ego shell is broken and the other is taken into its own body, we can say that the ego has denied itself, or that the ego has taken its first steps toward the infinite. Religiously, here ensues an intense struggle between the finite and the infinite or infinite, between the intellect and a higher power, or more plainly, between the flesh
There was
and the spirit.
Slither. It's like Sneak.
This is the problem of problems that has driven away many a youth into the hands of Satan. When a grown-up man looks back to these youthful days, he cannot but feel a sort of shudder going through his entire frame. The struggle to be fought in sincerity may go on up to the age of 30, when Confucius states that he knew where to stand.
Trying to kill you.
The religious consciousness is now fully awakened, and all the possible ways of escaping from the struggle or bringing it to an end are most earnestly sought in every direction. Books are read, lectures are attended, sermons are greedily taken in, and various religious exercises or disciplines are tried, and naturally Zen too comes to be inquired into. How does Zen solve the problem of problems? In the first place, Zen proposes its solution by directly appealing to facts of personal experience and not to book knowledge. The nature of one's own being, where apparently rages the struggle between the finite and the infinite, is to be grasped by a higher faculty than the intellect. For Zen says, it is the latter that first made us raise the question which it could not answer by itself, and that therefore it is to be put aside to make room for something higher and more enlightening. For the intellect has a peculiarly disquieting quality in it. Though it raises questions enough to disturb the serenity of the mind, it is too frequently unable to give satisfactory answers to them. It upsets the blissful peace of ignorance, and yet it does not restore the former state of things by offering something else. Because it points out ignorance, it is often considered illuminating, whereas the fact is that it disturbs, not necessarily always bringing light on its path. It is not final. It waits for something higher than itself for the solution of all the questions it will raise, regardless of consequences. If it were able to bring a new order into the disturbance and settle it once for all, there would have been no need for philosophy after it had been first systematized by a great thinker, by an Aristotle or by a Hegel. But the history of thought proves that each new structure raised by a man of extraordinary intellect is sure to be pulled down by the succeeding ones. And this constant pulling down and building up is all right as far as philosophy itself is concerned, for the inherent nature of the intellect, as I take it, demands it, and we cannot put a stop to the progress of philosophical inquiries any more than to our breathing. But when it comes to the question of life itself, we cannot wait for the ultimate solution to be offered by the intellect, even if it could do so. We cannot suspend, even for a moment, our life activity for philosophy to unravel its mysteries. Let the mysteries remain as they are. But live we must. The hungry cannot wait until a complete analysis of food is obtained and the nourishing value of each element is determined. For the dead, the scientific knowledge of food will be of no use whatever. Zen, therefore, does not rely on the intellect for the solution of its deepest problems. By personal experience, it is meant to get at the fact at first hand, and not through any intermediary, whatever this may be. Its favorite analogy is to point at the moon a finger is needed, but woe to those who take the finger for the moon. A basket is welcome to carry our fish home, but when the fish are safely on the table, why should we eternally bother ourselves with the basket? Here stands the fact, and let us grasp it with the naked hands, lest it should slip away. This is what Zen proposes to do. As nature abhors a vacuum, Zen abhors anything coming between the fact and ourselves. According to Zen, there is no struggle in the fact itself, such as between the finite and the infinite, between the flesh and the spirit. These are idle distinctions, fictitiously designed by the intellect for its own interest. Those who take them too seriously, or those who try to read them into the very fact of life, are those who take the finger for the moon. When we are hungry, we eat. When we are sleepy, we lay ourselves down. And where does the infinite or the finite come in here? Are not we complete in ourselves and each in himself? Life as it is lived suffices. It is only when the disquieting intellect steps in and tries to murder it that we stop to live and imagine ourselves to be short of or in something. Let the intellect alone. It has its usefulness in its proper sphere, but let it not interfere with the flowing of the life stream. If you are at all tempted to look into it, do so while letting it flow. The fact of flowing must under no circumstances be arrested or meddled with. For the moment your hands are dipped into, its transparency is disturbed. It ceases to reflect your image, which you have had from the very beginning and will continue to have to the end of time. Almost corresponding to the four maxims of the Nichiren sect, Zen has its own four statements. A special transmission outside the scriptures, no dependence upon words and letters, direct pointing to the soul of man, seeing into one's nature and the attainment of Buddhahood. This sums up all that is claimed by Zen as religion. Of course, we must not forget that there is a historical background to this bold pronunciamento. At the time of the introduction of Zen into China, most of the Buddhists were addicted to the discussion of highly metaphysical questions, or satisfied with the merely observing of the ethical precepts laid down by the Buddha, or with the leading of a lethargic life entirely absorbed in the contemplation of the evanescence of things worldly. They all missed apprehending the great fact of life itself, which flows altogether outside of these vain exercises of the intellect or of the imagination. Bodhidharma and his successors recognized this pitiful state of affairs, hence their proclamation of the four great statements of Zen. In a word, they mean that Zen has its own way of pointing to the nature of one's own being, and that when this is done, one attains to Buddhahood, in which all the contradictions and disturbances caused by the intellect are entirely harmonized in a unity of higher order. For this reason, Zen never explains, but indicates. It does not appeal to circumlocution, nor does it generalize. It always deals with facts, concrete and tangible. Logically considered, Zen may be full of contradictions and repetitions, but as it stands above all things, it goes serenely on its own way. As the Zen master aptly puts it, carrying his homemade cane on the shoulder, he goes right on among the mountains, one rising above another. It does not challenge logic, it simply walks its path of facts, leaving all the rest to their own fates. It is only when logic, neglecting its proper function, tries to step into the track of Zen that it loudly proclaims its principles and forcibly drives out the intruder. Zen is not an enemy of anything. There is no reason why it should antagonize the intellect, which may sometimes be utilized for the cause of Zen itself. To show some examples of Zen's direct dealing with the fundamental facts of existence, the following are selected. Rinzai, Lin Chi, once delivered a sermon saying, "Over a mass of reddish flesh there sits a true man who has no title. He is all the time coming in and out from your sense organs. If you have not yet testified to the fact, look." A monk came forward and asked, "Who is this true man of no title?" Rinzai came down from his straw chair and, taking hold of the monk, exclaimed, "Speak, speak." The monk remained irresolute, not knowing what to say, whereupon the master, letting him go, remarked, "What worthless stuff is this true man of no title?" Rinzai then went straight back to his room. Rinzai was noted for his rough and direct treatment of his disciples. He never liked those roundabout dealings which generally characterize the methods of a lukewarm master. He must have got this directness from his own teacher Obaku, Huang Ni, by whom he was struck 3 times for asking what the fundamental principle of Buddhism was. It goes without saying that Zen has nothing to do with mere striking or roughly shaking the questioner. If you take this as constituting the essentials of Zen, you would commit the same gross error as one who took the finger for the moon. As in everything else, but most particularly in Zen, all its outward manifestations or demonstrations must never be regarded as final. They just indicate the way where to look for the facts. Therefore, these indicators are important. We cannot do well without them. But once caught in them, which are like entangling meshes, we are doomed. For Zen can never be comprehended. Some may think Zen is always trying to catch you in the net of logic or by the snare of words. If you once slip your steps, you are bound for eternal damnation. You will never get to freedom, for which your hearts are so burning. Therefore Rinzai grasps with his naked hands what is directly presented to us all. If a third eye of ours is opened, undimmed, we shall know in a most unmistakable manner where Rinzai is driving us. We have first of all to get into the very spirit of the master and interview the inner man right there. No amount of wordy explanations will ever lead us into the nature of our own selves. The more you explain, the further it runs away from you. It is like trying to get hold of your own shadow. You run after it and it runs with you at the identical rate of speed. When you realize it, you read deep into the spirit of Rinzai or Obaku, and their real kind-heartedness will begin to be appreciated. When the truth-seeking monk was allowed to go inside the gate, the master took hold of him by the chest and demanded, "Speak! Speak!" Uman hesitated, whereupon the master pushed him out of the gate, saying, "Oh, you good-for-nothing fellow!" While the gate was hastily shut, one of Uman's legs was caught and broken. The intense pain resulting from this apparently awakened the poor fellow to the greatest fact of life. He was no more a solicitous, pity-begging monk. The realization now gained paid more than enough for the loss of his leg. He was not, however, a solitary instance in this respect. There were many such in the history of Zen who were willing to sacrifice a part of the body for the truth. Says Confucius, "If a man understands the Tao in the morning It is well with him even when he dies in the evening. Some would feel indeed that truth is of more value than mere living, mere vegetative or animal living. But in the world, alas, there are so many living corpses wallowing in the mud of ignorance and sensuality. This is where Zen is most difficult to understand. Why this sarcastic vituperation? Why this seeming heartlessness? What fault had Uman to deserve the loss of his leg? He was a poor, truth-seeking monk, earnestly anxious to get enlightenment from the master. Was it really necessary for the latter, from his way of understanding Zen, to shut him out 3 times? And when the gate was half opened, to close it again so violently, so inhumanly? Was this the truth of Buddhism Uman was so eager to get? But the outcome of all this singularly was what was desired by both of them. As to the master, he was satisfied to see the disciple attain an insight into the secrets of his being. And as regards the disciple, he was most grateful for all that was done to him. Evidently, Zen is the most irrational, inconceivable thing in the world. And this is why I said before that Zen was not subject to logical analysis or to intellectual treatment. It must be directly and personally experienced by each of us in his inner spirit. Just as 2 stainless mirrors reflect each other, the fact and our own spirits must stand facing each other with no intervening agents. When this is done, we are able to seize upon the living, pulsating fact itself. Freedom is an empty word until then. The first object was to escape the bondage in which all finite beings find themselves. But if we do not cut asunder the very chain of ignorance with which we are bound, hands and feet, where shall we look for deliverance? And this chain of ignorance is wrought of nothing else but the intellect and sensuous infatuation, which cling tightly to every thought we may have, to every feeling we may entertain. They are hard to get rid of. They are like wet clothes, as is aptly expressed by the Zen masters. We are born free and equal. Whatever this may mean socially or politically, Zen maintains that it is absolutely true in the spiritual domain, and that all the fetters and manacles we seem to be carrying about ourselves are put on later through ignorance of the true condition of existence. All the treatments, sometimes literary and sometimes physical, which are most liberally and kind-heartedly given by the masters to inquiring souls, are intended to get them back to the original state of freedom. And this is never really realized until we once personally experience it through our own efforts, independent of any representation. The ultimate standpoint of Zen, therefore, is that we have been led astray through ignorance to find a split in our own being, that there was from the very beginning no need for a struggle between the finite and the infinite, that the peace we are seeking so eagerly after has been there all the time. Sotoba Su Tungpo, the noted Chinese poet and statesman, expresses the idea in the following verse: misty rain on Mount Lu, and waves surging in Chi-Chang. When you have not yet been there, many a regret surely you have. But once there, and homeward you wend, how matter-of-fact things look, misty rain on Mount Lu, and waves surging in Chiachang. This is what is also asserted by Sijin Ishin, Qingyuan Weixin, according to whom, before a man studies Zen, to him, mountains are mountains and waters are waters. After he gets an insight into the truth of Zen, through the instruction of a good master, mountains to him are not mountains and waters are not waters. But after this, when he really attains to the abode of rest, mountains are once more mountains, and waters are waters. Bokuju Muchao, who lived in the latter half of the 9th century, was once asked, "We have to dress and eat every day, and how can we escape from all that?" The master replied, "We dress, we eat. I do not understand you," said the questioner. "If you don't understand, put your dress on and eat your food." Zen always deals in concrete facts and does not indulge in generalization. And I do not wish to add any unnecessary legs to the painted snake, but if I try to waste my philosophical comments on Bokuju, I may say this: we are all finite. We cannot live out of time and space. Inasmuch as we are earth created, there is no way to grasp the infinite. How can we deliver ourselves from the limitations of existence? This is perhaps the idea put in the first question of the monk, to which the master replies, "Salvation must be sought in the finite itself. There is nothing infinite apart from finite things. If you seek something transcendental that will cut you off from this world of relativity, which is the same thing as the annihilation of yourself, you do not want salvation at the cost of your own existence. If so, drink and eat and find your way of freedom in this drinking and eating." This was too much for the questioner, who therefore confessed himself as not understanding the meaning of the master. Therefore the latter continued, "Whether you understand or not, just the same, go on living in the finite, with the finite. For you die if you stop eating and keeping yourself warm on account of your aspiration for the infinite. No matter how you struggle, nirvana is to be sought in the midst of samsara, birth and death. Whether an enlightened Zen master or an ignoramus of the first degree, neither can escape the so-called laws of nature. When the stomach is empty, both are hungry. When it snows, both have to put on an extra flannel. I do not, however, mean that they are both material existences, but they are what they are regardless of their conditions of spiritual development. As the Buddhist scriptures have it, the darkness of the cave itself turns into enlightenment when a torch of spiritual insight burns. It is not that a thing called darkness is first taken out, and another thing known by the name of enlightenment is carried in later, but that enlightenment and darkness are substantially one and the same thing from the very beginning. The change from the one to the other has taken place only inwardly or subjectively. Therefore, the finite is the infinite and vice versa. These are not two separate things, though we are compelled to conceive them so intellectually. This is the idea logically interpreted, perhaps contained in Bokuju's answer given to the monk. The mistake consists in our splitting into two. What is really and absolutely one? Is not life one as we live it? which we cut to pieces by recklessly applying the murderous knife of intellectual surgery. On being requested by the monks to deliver a sermon, Hyakujo Nihan told them to work on the farm, after which he would give them a talk on the great subject of Buddhism. They did as they were told and came to the master for a sermon, when the latter, without saying a word, merely extended his open arms towards the monks. Perhaps there is, after all, nothing mysterious in Zen. Everything is open to your full view. If you eat your food and keep yourself cleanly dressed and work on the farm to raise your rice or vegetables, you are doing all that is required of you on this earth, and the infinite is realized in you. How realized? When Bokuju was asked what Zen was, he recited a Sanskrit phrase from a sutra, Mahaprajna Paramita. The inquirer acknowledged his inability to understand the purport of the strange phrase, and the master put a comment on it, saying, "My robe is all worn out after so many years' usage, and parts of it in shreds, loosely hanging, have been blown away to the clouds." Is the infinite, after all, such a poverty-stricken mendicant? A contentment gleaned from idleness or from laissez-faire attitude of mind is a thing most to be abhorred. There is no Zen in this, but sloth and mere vegetation. The battle must rage in its full vigor and masculinity. Without it, whatever peace that obtains has no deep foundation. The first storm it may encounter will crush it to the ground. Zen is quite emphatic in this. Certainly the moral virility to be found in Zen, apart from its mystic flight, comes from the fighting of the battle of life courageously and undauntedly. From the ethical point of view, Zen may be considered a discipline aiming at the reconstruction of character. Our ordinary life only touches the fringe of personality. It does not cause a commotion in the deepest parts of the soul. Even when the religious consciousness is awakened, most of us lightly pass over it so as to leave no marks of a bitter fighting on the soul. We are thus made to live on the superficiality of things. We may be clever, bright, and all that, but what we produce lacks depth, sincerity, and does not appeal to the inmost feelings. Some are utterly unable to create anything except makeshifts or imitations, betraying their shallowness of character and want of spiritual experience. While Zen is primarily religious, it also molds our moral character. It may be better to say that a deep spiritual experience is bound to affect a change in the moral structure of one's personality. How is this so? The truth of Zen is such that when we want to comprehend it penetratingly, we have to go through with a great struggle, sometimes very long and exacting, constant vigilance. To be disciplined in Zen is no easy task. A Zen master once remarked that the life of a monk can be attained only by a man of great moral strength, and that even a minister of the state cannot expect to become a successful monk. Let us remark here that in China, to be a minister of the state was considered to be the greatest achievement a man could ever hope for in this world. Not that a monkish life requires the austere practice of asceticism, but that it implies the elevation of one's spiritual powers to their highest notch. Now, all the utterances or activities of the great Zen masters have come from this evaluation. They are not intended to be enigmatic or driving us to confusion. They are the overflowing of a soul filled with deep experiences. Therefore, unless we are ourselves elevated to the same height as the masters, we cannot gain the same commanding views of life. Says Ruskin, and be sure also, if the author is worth anything, that you will not get at his meaning all at once. Nay, that as his whole meaning you will not for a long time arrive in any wise. Not that he does not say what he means, and in strong words too, but he cannot say it all, and what is more strange, will not, but in a hidden way and in parable, in order that he may be sure you want it. I cannot see quite the reason of this, nor analyze that cruel reticence in the breasts of wise men which makes them always hide their deeper thought. They do not give it to you by way of help, but of reward, and will make themselves sure that you deserve it before they allow you to reach it. And this key to the royal treasury of wisdom is given us only after patient and painful moral struggle. The mind is ordinarily chock full with all kinds of intellectual nonsense and passional rubbish. They are, of course, useful in their own ways in our daily life. There's no denying that. But it is chiefly because of these accumulations that we are made miserable and groan under the feeling of bondage. Each time we want to make a movement, they fetter us, they choke us, and cast a heavy veil over our spiritual horizon. We feel as if we are constantly living under restraint. We long for naturalness and freedom, yet we do not seem to attain them. The Zen masters know this, for they have gone through with the same experiences once. They want to have us get rid of all these wearisome burdens, which we really do not have to carry in order to live a life of truth and enlightenment. Thus they utter a few words and demonstrate with action that, when rightly comprehended, will deliver us from the oppression and tyranny of these intellectual accumulations. But the comprehension does not come to us so easily. Being so long accustomed to the oppression, the mental inertia becomes hard to remove. In fact, it has gone down deep into the roots of our own being, and the whole structure of personality is to be overturned. The process of reconstruction is stained with tears and blood, but the height the great masters have climbed cannot otherwise be reached. The truth of Zen can never be attained unless it is attacked with the full force of personality. The passage is strewn with thistles and brambles, and the climb is slippery in the extreme. It is no pastime, but the most serious task in life. No idlers will ever dare attempt it. It is indeed a moral anvil on which your character is hammered and hammered. To the question, what is Zen? A master gave this answer: boiling oil over a blazing fire. This scorching experience we have to go through with before Zen smiles on us and says, here is your home. Zen in relation to Buddhism generally. Superficially, indeed, there's something in Zen so bizarre and even irrational as to frighten the pious literary followers of the so-called primitive Buddhism, and to make them declare that Zen is not Buddhism, but a Chinese anomaly of it. What, for instance, would they really make out of such statements as follows? In the sayings of Nan Chuan, we read that when Tsui, governor of Chai district, asked the fifth patriarch of the Zen sect, that is, Hongzhen, how it was that while he had 500 followers, Huineng, in preference to all others, was singled out to be given the orthodox robe of transmission as the sixth patriarch. The fifth patriarch replied, 499 out of my disciples understand well what Buddhism is, except one Huineng. He is a man not to be measured by an ordinary standard. Hence the robe of faith was handed over to him. In the age of void, there are no words whatever. As soon as the Buddha appears on earth, words come into existence, hence our clinging to signs. And thus, as we now so firmly take hold of words, we limit ourselves in various ways, while in the great way, there are absolutely no such things as ignorance or holiness. Everything that has a name thereby limits itself. Therefore, the old master of Chiang-si declared that it is neither mind, nor Buddha, nor a thing. It was in this way that he wished to guide his followers. While these days they vainly endeavor to experience the great way by hypostasizing such an entity as mind. If the way could be mastered in this manner, it would be well for them to wait until the appearance of Maitreya Buddha, which is said to be at the end of the world, and then to awaken the enlightenment thought. How could such ones ever hope for spiritual freedom? Under the fifth patriarch, all of his 500 disciples, except one Hui Neng, understood Buddhism well. The lay disciple, Neng, was quite unique in this respect, for he did not at all understand Buddhism. He understood the way only, and no other thing. These are not very extraordinary statements in the Zen, but to most of the Zen critics, they must spell abomination. Buddhism is flatly denied, and its knowledge is regarded not to be indispensable to the mastery of Zen, the great way, which on the contrary is more or less identified with the negation of Buddhism. How is this? To make this point clear, and to justify the claim for Zen that it transmits the essence of Buddhism and not its formulated articles of faith, as are recorded in letters, it is necessary to strip the spirit of Buddhism of all its outer casings and appendages, which, hindering the working of its original life force, are apt to make us take the unessential for the essential. We know that the acorn is so different from the oak, but as long as there is continuation of growth, their identity is a logical conclusion. To see really into the nature of the acorn is to trace an uninterrupted development through its various historical stages. When the seed remains a seed and means nothing more, there is no life in it. It is a finished piece of work, and except as an object of historical curiosity, it has no value whatever in our religious experience. In like manner, to determine the nature of Buddhism, we must go along its whole line of development and see what are the healthiest and most vital germs in it, which have brought it to the present state of maturity. When this is done, we shall see in what manner Zen is to be recognized as one of the various phases of Buddhism. The constitution of any existent religion that has a long history, it is very advisable to comprehend this constitution, to separate its founder from his teaching as a most powerful determinant in the development of the latter. And by this I mean, in the first place, that the founder, so-called, had in the beginning no idea of being the founder of any religious system which would later grow up in his name. In the second, that to his disciples, while he was yet alive, his personality was not regarded as independent of his teaching, at least as far as they were conscious of the fact. In the third, that what was unconsciously working in their minds as regards the nature of their master's personality came out in the foreground after his passing with all the possible intensity that had been latently gaining strength within them. And lastly, that the personality of the founder grew up in his disciples' minds so powerful as to make itself the very nucleus of his teaching. That is to say, the latter was made to serve as explanation of the meaning of the former. Zen, in spite of the uncouthness and extraordinariness of its outward features, belongs to the general system of Buddhism, and by Buddhism we mean not only the teaching of the Buddha himself as recorded in the earliest agamas, but the later speculations, philosophical and religious, concerning the person and life of the Buddha. His personal greatness was such as occasionally made his disciples advance theories somewhat contrary to the advice supposed to have been given by their master. This was inevitable. The world, with all its contents individually as well as a whole, is subject to our subjective interpretation, not a capricious interpretation indeed, but growing out of our inner necessity, our religious yearnings. The Buddha's enlightenment and nirvana were two separate ideas in his life as it unfolded in history so many centuries ago. But from the religious point of view, they are to be regarded as one idea. That is to say, to understand the content and the value of enlightenment is the same as realizing the signification of nirvana. Taking a stand on this, the Mahayanists developed two currents of thought. The one was to rely on our intellectual efforts to the furthest extent they could reach, and the other pursuing the practical method adopted by the Buddha himself. Indeed, by all Indian truth seekers, endeavor to find in the practice of Hayana something directly leading to enlightenment. So it goes without saying that in both of these efforts, the original impulse lies in the inmost religious consciousness of pious Buddhists. The truth has many avenues of approach through which it makes itself known to the human mind, but the choice it makes depends on certain limitations under which it works. The superabundance of Indian imagination issued in supernaturalism and wonderful symbolism, and the Chinese sense of practicalness and its love for the solid everyday facts of life resulted in Zen Buddhism. We may now be able to understand, though only tentatively by most readers at present, the following definitions of Zen offered by its masters. When Joshu was asked what Zen was, he answered, "It is cloudy today, and I won't answer." To the same question, Uman's reply was, "That's it." On another occasion, the master was not at all affirmative, for he said, "Not a word to be predicated." These being some of the definitions given to Zen by the masters, in what relationship did they conceive of Zen as standing to the doctrine of enlightenment taught in the sutras? Did they conceive it after the manner of the Lankavatara, or after that of the Prajnaparamita? No, Zen had to have its own way. The Chinese mind refused blindly to follow the Indian models. If this is still to be contested, read the following, and here. A monk asked Khan Chien, who lived in Harayo, Paling, "Is there any difference between the teaching of the patriarch and that of the sutras, or not?" Said the master, "When the cold weather comes, the fowl flies up in the trees while the wild duck goes down into the river." Hoyen, or Fayen, of Gozazan, commented on this, saying, "The great teacher of Peiling has expressed only half of the truth. I would not have it so. Mine is, when water is scooped in the hands, the moon is reflected in them. When the flowers are handled, the scent soaks into the robe." The history of Zen. The legendary story of the origin of Zen in India runs as follows. Sakyamuni was once engaged at the Mount of the Holy Vulture in preaching to a congregation of his disciples. He did not resort to any lengthy verbal discourse to explain his point, but simply lifted a bouquet of flowers before the assemblage, which was presented to him by one of his lay disciples. Not a word came out of his mouth. Nobody understood the meaning of this except the old venerable Mahakasyapa, who quietly smiled at the master, as if he fully comprehended the purport of this silent but eloquent teaching on the part of the enlightened one. The latter, perceiving this, opened his golden-tongued mouth and proclaimed solemnly, "I have the most precious treasure, spiritual and transcendental, which this moment I hand over to you, O Venerable Mahakasyapal." Orthodox Zen followers generally blindly take this incident to be the origin of their doctrine, in which, according to them, is disclosed the inmost mind of the Buddha, as well as a secret of the religion, as Zen claims to be the inmost essence of Buddhism, and to have been directly transmitted by the Buddha to his greatest disciple, Mahākasyapa. Its followers naturally look for the particular occasion when this transmission took place between the master and the disciple. We know in a general way that Mahākasyapa succeeded the Buddha as the leader of the faith. But as to his special transmission of Zen, we have no historical records in the Indian Buddhist writings at present in our possession. From the modern critical point of view, it did not matter very much whether Zen originated with Bodhidharma in China or with the Buddha in India, inasmuch as Zen is true and has an enduring value. And again, from the historian's point of view, which tries scientifically to ascertain the source of development resulting in Zen Buddhism, it is only important to find a logical connection between the Mahayana doctrine of enlightenment in India and its practical application by the Chinese to the actualities of life. And as to any special line of transmission in India before Bodhidharma, as was established by the Zen devotees, it is not a matter of much concern nor of great importance. But as soon as Zen is formulated into an independent system, not only with its characteristic features, but with its historical ascertainable facts, it will be necessary for the historians to trace its line of transmission complete and not interrupted. For in Zen, as we shall see, it is of the utmost importance for its followers to be truly certified or approved by the master as to the genuineness or orthodox character of their realization. As long as Zen is the product of the Chinese soil, from the Indian seed of enlightenment, no special line of transmission need be established in India unless it is in a general logical manner. The history of Zen dates with the coming of the Bodhidharma from the West, AD 520. He came to China with a which is summed up in the following lines. A special transmission outside scriptures, no dependence upon words and letters, direct pointing at the soul of man, seeing into one's nature and the attainment of Buddhahood. These 4 lines, as describing the principles of Zen teaching as distinguished from other schools of Buddhism, already in existence in China, were formulated later not by Dharma himself. We cannot exactly tell who was the real author or have no definite information on the subject. Our knowledge of the life of Bodhidharma comes from 2 sources. One, which is the earliest record we have, by Tao Xuan in his biographies of the high priests, which was compiled early in the Tang dynasty, AD 645. The author was the founder of a Vinaya sect in China, and a learned scholar who, however, was living before the movement of the new school to be known as Zen, came into maturity under Hui Neng, the 6th patriarch, who was 9 years old when Tao Xuan wrote his biographies. The other source is the records of the transmission of the lamp, AD 1004, compiled by Tao Yuan early in the Sung dynasty. And this was written by a Zen monk after Zen had received full recognition as a special branch of Buddhism, and contains sayings and doings of its masters. The author often refers to some earlier Zen histories as his authorities, which are, however, lost now, being known by the titles only. Dhyana, in essence, is birthless, without attaching yourself to the thought of birth and death. Think in Dhyana. Have your mind like unto space, and yet have no thought of space. Thus, learning of the 6th patriarch's view on Samadhi or Dhyana, Chi Huang came to a master himself and asked to be further enlightened, and said the patriarch, "What Zhuangzi told you is true. Have your mind like unto space, and yet entertain it in no thought of emptiness. And then the truth will have its full activity unimpeded. Every moment of yours will come out of an innocent heart, and the ignorant and the wise will have an equal treatment in your hands. Subject and object will lose their distinction, and essence and appearance will be of one suchness. When a world of absolute oneness is thus realized, you have attained to eternal samadhi. To make the position of the sixth patriarch on the subject of meditation still clearer and more definite, let me quote another incident from his platform sutra. A monk once made reference to a gatha composed by Wo Luan, which read as follows: I, Wo Luan, know a device whereby to blot out all my thoughts. The objective world no more stirs the mind, and daily matures my enlightenment. Hearing this, the sixth patriarch remarked, that is no enlightenment, but leads one into a state of bondage. Listen to my gatha. I, Hui Neng, know no device. My thoughts are not suppressed. The objective world ever stirs the mind. And what is the use of maturing enlightenment? These will be sufficient to show that Hui Neng, the sixth patriarch, was, on the one hand, no quietist, nor nihilist advocating the doctrine of absolute emptiness, while on the other hand, he was no idealist either, in the sense of denying an objective world. His dhyana was full of action, yet above a world of particulars, so long as it was not carried away by it and in it. Hui Neng's method of demonstrating the truth of Zen was purely Chinese, not Indian. He did not resort to abstract terminology nor to romantic mysticism. The method was direct, plain, concrete, and highly practical. When the monk Ming came to him and asked for instruction, he said, "Show me your original face before you were born." Is not the statement quite to the point? No philosophic discourse, no elaborate reasoning, no mystic imagery, but a direct, unequivocal dictum. In this, the sixth patriarch cut the first turf, and his disciples quickly and efficiently followed in his steps. According to Hui Neng's doctrine, non-doing is reality. Emptiness is the truth. And the ultimate meaning of things is vast and immovable. He taught that human nature in its beginning, as well as in the end, is thoroughly good and does not require any artificial weeding out, for it has its root in that which is serene. The Emperor Cheng Cuang heard of him and sent his courtier twice asking him to appear at court, but failed to get him out. So the emperor had his words instead, which he took for his spiritual guidance. The teaching of the sixth patriarch in detail is generally accessible today. All those who talk at all about Zen find their source of information in Cao Qi. After Hui Neng, Zen was split up into several schools, two of which have survived even down to this day, in China as well as in Japan, though much modified in various aspects. The principle and spirit of Zen Buddhism is still alive, as it was in the days of the sixth patriarch, and is one of the great spiritual heritages of the East. It is still wielding its unique influence, especially among the cultured people in Japan. Satori, or enlightenment. The essence of Zen Buddhism consists in acquiring a new viewpoint on life and things generally. And by this I mean that if we want to get into the inmost life of Zen, we must forego all our ordinary habits of thinking which control our everyday life. We must try to see if there is any other way of judging things, or rather if our ordinary way is always sufficient to give us the ultimate satisfaction of our spiritual needs. If we feel dissatisfied somehow with this life, if there is something in our ordinary way of living that deprives us of freedom in its most sanctified sense, We must endeavor to find a way somewhere which gives us a sense of finality and contentment. Zen proposes to do this for us and assures us of the acquirement of a new point of view in which life assumes a fresher, deeper, and more satisfying aspect. This acquirement, however, is really and naturally the greatest mental cataclysm one can go through within life. It's no easy task. It is a kind of fiery baptism, and one has to go through the storm, the earthquake, the overthrowing of the mountains, and the breaking in pieces of the rocks. This acquiring of a new point of view in our dealings with life and the world is popularly called by Japanese Zen students Satori. Wu in Chinese. It is really another name for enlightenment, which is the word used by the Buddha and his Indian followers ever since his realization under the Bodhi tree by the river Naranjana. There are several other phases in Chinese designating this spiritual experience, each of which has a special connotation, showing tentatively how this phenomenon is interpreted. At all events, there is no Zen without Satori, which is indeed the alpha and omega of Zen Buddhism. Zen devoid of Satori is like a sun without its light and heat. Zen may lose all its literature, all its monasteries, and all its paraphernalia, but as long as there is Satori in it, it will survive to eternity. I want to emphasize this most fundamental fact concerning the very life of Zen, for there are some, even among the students of Zen themselves, who are blind to this central fact and are apt to think when Zen has been explained away logically or psychologically, or as one of the Buddhist philosophies, which can be summed up by using highly technical and conceptual Buddhist phrases, Zen is exhausted. There remains nothing in it that makes it what it is. But my contention is the life of Zen begins with the opening of Satori. Kai Wu in Chinese. Satori may be defined as an intuitive looking into the nature of things, in contradistinction to the analytical or logical understanding of it. Practically, it means the unfolding of a new world, hitherto unperceived, in the confusion of a dualistically trained mind. Or we may say that with Satori, our entire surroundings are viewed from quite an unexpected angle of perception. Whatever this is, the world for those who have gained a Satori is no more the old world as it used to be, even with all its flowering streams and burning fires. It is never the same one again. Logically stated, all its opposites and contradictions are united and harmonized into a consistent organic whole. And this is a mystery and a miracle, but according to the Zen masters, such is being performed every day. Satori can thus be had only through our once personally experiencing it. In the psychology of religion, this spiritual enhancement of one's whole life is called conversion, but as the term is generally used by Christian converts, it cannot be applied in its strict sense to the Buddhist experience, especially to that of the Zen followers. The term has too affective or emotional a shade to take the place of Satori, which is above all noetic. The general tendency of Buddhism is, as we know, more intellectual than emotional, and its doctrine of enlightenment distinguishes it sharply from the Christian view of salvation. Zen, as one of the Mahayana schools, naturally shares a large amount of what we may call transcendental intellectualism, which does not issue in logical dualism. When poetically or figuratively expressed, Satori is the opening of the mind flower, or the removing of the bar, or the brightening up of the mind works. If you wish to seek the Buddha, you ought to see into your own nature. For this nature is the Buddha himself. If you have not seen into your own nature, what is the use of thinking of the Buddha, reciting the sutras, observing a fast, or keeping the precepts? By thinking of the Buddha, your cause, i.e., meritorious deed, may bear fruit. By reciting the sutras, your intelligence may grow brighter. By keeping the precepts, you may be born in the heavens. By practicing charity, you may be rewarded abundantly. But as to seeking the Buddha, you are far away from him. If yourself is not yet clearly comprehended, you ought to see a wise teacher and get a thorough understanding as to the root of birth and death. One who has not seen into one's own nature is not to be called a wise teacher. When this seeing into one's own nature is not attained, one cannot escape from the transmigration of birth and death. However well one may be versed in the study of the sacred scriptures in 12 divisions, no time will ever come to one to get out of the sufferings of the triple world. Anciently, there was a Bhikshu Zensho, or Shan Singh, who was capable of reciting all the 12 divisions of scriptures, yet he could not save himself from transmigration because he had no insight into his own nature. If this was the case even with Zensho, how about those moderners who, being able to discourse only on a few sutras and sastras, regard themselves as exponents of Buddhism? They are truly simple-minded ones. When mind is not understood, it is absolutely of no avail to recite and discourse on idle literature. If you want to seek the Buddha, you ought to see into your own nature, which is the Buddha himself. The Buddha is a free man, a man who neither works nor achieves. If indeed of seeing into your own nature you turn away and seek the Buddha in external things, you will never get at him. The Buddha is your own mind. Make no mistake to bow to external objects. Buddha is a Western word, and in this country it means enlightened nature, and by enlightened is meant spiritually enlightened. It is one's own spiritual nature in enlightenment that responds to the external world. It comes in contact with objects, raises the eyebrows, winks the eyelids, and moves the hands and legs. This nature is the mind, and the mind is the Buddha, and the Buddha is the way, and the way is Zen. This simple word, Zen, is beyond the comprehension of both of the wise and the ignorant. To see directly into one's original nature, this is Zen. Even if you are well learned in hundreds of the sutras and sastras, you still remain an ignoramus in Buddhism when you have not yet seen into your own original nature. Buddhism is not there in mere learning. The highest truth is unfathomably deep. It's not an object of talk or discussion, and even the canonical texts have no way to bring it within our reach. Let us once see into our own original nature, and we have the truth, even when we are quite illiterate, not knowing a word. Those who have not seen into their own nature may read the sutras, think of the Buddha, study long, work hard, practice religion throughout the 6 periods of the day, sit for a long time and never lie down for sleep, and may be wide in learning and well-informed in all things, and they may believe that all this is Buddhism. All the Buddhas in successive ages only talk of seeing into one's nature. All things are impermanent until you get an insight into your nature. Do not say, I have perfect knowledge. Such is really committing a very grave crime. Ananda, one of the 10 great disciples of the Buddha, was known for his wide information, but did not have any insight into Buddhahood, because he was so bent on gaining information only. Here are some examples to show that the whole Zen discipline gains meaning when there takes place this turning of the mental hinge to a wider and deeper world. For when this wise and deeper world opens, everyday life, even the most trivial thing of it, grows loaded with the truths of Zen. On the one hand, therefore, Satori is a most prosaic and matter-of-fact thing. On the other hand, a mystery. But after all, is not life itself filled with wonders, mysteries, and unfathomabilities far beyond our discursive understanding? A monk asked Joshu, who lived from 778 to 897, to be instructed in Zen. And said the master, "Have you had your breakfast or not?" "Yes, master, I have," answered the monk. "If so, have your dishes washed?" was an immediate response, which it is said at once opened the monk's mind to the truth of Zen. As to the opening of Satori, all that Zen can do is to indicate the way and leave the rest all to one's own experience. And that is to say, following up the indication and arriving at the goal. This is to be done by oneself and without another's help. With all that the master can do, he is helpless to make the disciple take hold of the thing unless the latter is inwardly fully prepared for it. And just as we cannot make a horse drink against his will, the taking hold of the ultimate reality is to be done by oneself. Just as the flower blooms out of its inner necessity, the looking into one's own nature must be the outcome of one's own inner overflowing. And this is where Zen is so personal and subjective in the sense of being inner and creative. Zen does not give us any intellectual assistance, nor does it waste time in arguing the point with us, but it merely suggests or indicates, not because it wants to be indefinite, but because that is really the only thing it can do for us. If it could, it would do anything to help us come to an understanding. In fact, Zen is exhausting every possible means to do that, as we can see in all the great masters' attitudes towards their disciples. When they are actually knocking them down, their kind-heartedness is never to be doubted. They are just waiting for the time when their pupils' minds get all ripened for the final moment. When this has come, the opportunity of opening an eye to the truth of Zen lies everywhere. One can pick it up in the hearing of an inarticulate sound, or listening to an unintelligible remark, or in the observation of a flower blooming, or in the encountering of any trivial, everyday incident, such as stumbling, rolling up a screen, using a fan, etc. And these are all sufficient conditions that will awaken one's inner sense. Evidently a most insignificant happening, and yet its effect on the mind infinitely surpasses all that one could expect of it. A light touch of an ignited wire and an explosion shaking the very foundations of the earth. In fact, all the causes of Satori are in the mind. That is why, when the clock clicks, all that has been lying there bursts up like a volcanic eruption or flashes out like a bolt of lightning. Zen calls this returning to one's own home. For its followers will declare, "You have now found yourself. From the very beginning, nothing has been kept away from you. It was yourself that closed the eye to the fact. In Zen, there is nothing to explain, nothing to teach that will add to your knowledge. Unless it grows out of yourself, no knowledge is really of value to you. A borrowed plumage never grows." As Satori strikes at the primary fact of existence, its attainment marks a turning point in one's life. The attainment, however, must be thoroughgoing and clear-cut in order to produce a satisfactory result. To deserve the name Satori, the mental revolution must be so complete as to make one really and sincerely feel that there took place a fiery baptism of the Spirit. The intensity of this feeling is proportional to the amount of effort the opener of Satori has put into the achievement, for there is no gradation in Satori as to its intensity, as in all our mental activity. The possessor of a lukewarm Satori may suffer no such spiritual revolution as Rinzai. Zen is a matter of character and not of the intellect, which means that Zen grows out of the will as the first principle of life. A brilliant intellect may fail to unravel all the mysteries of Zen, but a strong soul will drink deep of the inexhaustible fountain. I do not know if the intellect is superficial and touches only the fringe of one's personality, but the fact is that the will is the man himself, and Zen appeals to it. When one becomes penetratingly conscious of the working of this agency, there is the opening of Satori and the understanding of Zen. As they say, the snake has now grown into the dragon, or more graphically, a common cur, a most miserable creature wagging its tail for food and sympathy, and kicked about by the street boys so mercilessly, has now turned into a golden-haired lion whose roar frightens to death all the feeble-minded. When our consideration is limited to the objective side of Satori, it does not appear to be a very extraordinary thing. This opening an eye to the truth of Zen. The master makes some remarks, and if they happen to be opportune enough, the disciple will come at once to a realization and see into a mystery hitherto undreamed of. It seems all to depend upon what kind of mood or what state of mental preparedness one is in at the moment. Zen is, after all, a haphazard affair. One may be tempted to think, but when we know that it took Nangaku 8 long years to answer the question, "Who is he that thus cometh towards me?" we shall realize the fact that there was in him a great deal of mental anguish and tribulation, which he had to go through before he could come to the final solution and declare, even when one asserts that it is a somewhat, one misses it altogether. We must try to look into the psychological aspect of Satori, where is revealed the inner mechanism of opening the door to the eternal secrets of the human soul. In olden days, when I was at Sokei, Shuangjing, before 1 month was over after my return to the meditation hall there, one night, while deep in sleep, I suddenly found myself fixing my attention on the question, all things return to the One. But where does this One return? My attention was so rigidly fixed on this that I neglected sleeping, forgot to eat, and did not distinguish east from west nor morning from night. While spreading the napkin, producing the bowls, or attending to my natural wants, whether I moved or rested, whether I talked or kept silent, my whole existence was wrapped up with the question, where does this One return? No other thoughts ever disturbed my consciousness. No, even if I wanted to stir up the least bit of thought irrelevant to the central one, I could not do so. It was like being screwed up or glued. However much I tried to shake myself off, it refused to move. Though I was in the midst of a crowd or a congregation, I felt as if I were all by myself. From morning till evening, from evening till morning, so transparent, so tranquil, so majestically above all things were my feelings. Absolutely pure and not a particle of dust. My one thought covered eternity. So calm was the outside world, so oblivious of the existence of other people I was. Like an idiot, like an imbecile. 6 days and nights thus elapsed when I entered the shrine with the rest, reciting the sutras, and happened to raise my head and looked at the verse by Gosso. This made me all of a sudden awake from the spell, and the meaning of, "Who carries this lifeless corpse of yours?" burst upon me, the question once given by an old master. I felt as if this boundless space itself were broken up into pieces, and the great earth were altogether leveled away. I forgot myself. I forgot the world. It was like one mirror reflecting another. I tried several koan in my mind and found them so transparently clear. I was no more deceived as to the wonderful working of prana, transcendental wisdom. When Koho saw his old master later, the latter lost no time in asking him, "Who is it that carries this lifeless corpse of yours?" Koho burst out a "Quats!" Therefore the master took up a stick, ready to give him a blow. But the disciple held it back, saying, "You cannot give me a blow today." "Why can't I?" was the master's demand. Instead of replying to him, however, Koho left the room briskly. The following day the master asked him, "All things return to the One, and where does the One return to?" "The dog is lapping the boiling water in the cauldron." "Where did you get this nonsense?" reprimanded the master. "You had better ask yourself," promptly came the response. The master rested well satisfied. These cases show what mental process one has to go through before the opening of Satori takes place. Of course, these are prominent examples and highly accentuated, and every Satori is not preceded by such an extraordinary degree of concentration. But an experience more or less like this must be the necessary antecedent to all Satori, especially to that which is to be gone through at the outset of the study. The mirror of mind, or the field of consciousness, then seems to be so thoroughly swept clean as not to leave a particle of dust on it. When thus all mentation is temporarily suspended, even the consciousness of an effort to keep an idea focused at the center of attention is gone. That is, when, as the Zen followers say, the mind is so completely possessed or identified with its object of thought that even the consciousness of identity is lost. As when one mirror reflects another, the subject feels as if living in a crystal palace, all transparent, refreshing, buoyant, and royal. But the end has not yet been reached, this being merely the preliminary condition leading to the consummation called Satori. If the mind remains in this state of fixation, there will be no occasion for its being awakened to the truth of Zen. It must be broken up and exploded into the next stage, which is looking into one's nature, or the opening of Satori. The explosion, as it is nothing else, generally takes place when this finely balanced equilibrium tilts for one reason or another. A stone is thrown into a sheet of water in perfect stillness, and the disturbance at once spreads all over the surface. It is somewhat like this. A sound knocks at the gate of consciousness so tightly closed, and it at once reverberates through the entire being of the individual. He is awakened in the most vivid sense of the world. He comes out baptized in the fire of creation. He has seen the work of God in his very workshop. The occasion may not necessarily be the hearing of a temple bell. It may be reading a stanza, or seeing something moving, or the sense of touch irritated, when a most highly accentuated state of concentration bursts out into a Satori. Chief characteristics of Satori. Number 1, irrationality. And by this I mean that Satori is not a conclusion to be reached by reasoning and defies all intellectual determination. Those who have experienced it are always at a loss to explain it coherently or logically. When it is explained at all, either in words or gestures, its content more or less undergoes a mutilation. The uninitiated are thus unable to grasp it by what is outwardly visible, while those who have had the experience discern what is genuine from what is not. The Satori experience is thus always characterized by irrationality, inexplicability, and incommunicability. Number 2, intuitive insight. that there is a noetic quality in mystic experiences has been pointed out by William James in his Varieties of Religious Experience, and this applies also to the Zen experience known as Satori. Another name for Satori is Kensho, meaning to see essence or nature, which apparently proves that there is seeing or perceiving in Satori, that this seeing is of quite a different quality from what is ordinarily designated as knowledge, need not be specifically noted. Hui Kei is reported to have made this statement concerning his Satori, which was confirmed by Bodhidharma himself. As to my Satori, it is not a total annihilation. It is knowledge of the most adequate kind, only it cannot be expressed in words. In this respect, Shen Hui was more explicit, for he says that the one character, Qi, or knowledge, is the source of all mysteries. Number 3, authoritativeness. By this I mean that the knowledge realized by Satori is final, that no amount of logical argument can refute it. Being direct and personal, it is sufficient unto itself. All that logic can do here is to explain it, to interpret it in connection with other kinds of knowledge with which our minds are filled. Satori is thus a form of perception, an inner perception, which takes place in the most interior part of consciousness. Hence the sense of authoritativeness, which means finality. So it is generally said that Zen is like drinking water, for it is by oneself that one knows whether it is warm or cold. The Zen perception being the last term of experience, it cannot be denied by outsiders who have no such experience. Number 4, affirmation. What is authoritative and final can never be negative, for negation has no value for our life. It leads us nowhere. It is not a power that urges, nor does it give one a place to rest. Though the Satori experience is sometimes expressed in negative terms, it is essentially an affirmative attitude towards all things that exist. It accepts them as they come along, regardless of their moral values. Buddhists call this shanti, or patience, or more properly, acceptance. That is, acceptance of things in their supra-relative or transcendental aspect, where no dualism of whatever sort avails. Number 5, sense of the beyond. Terminology may differ in different religions, and in Satori there's always what we may call a sense of the beyond. The experience indeed is my own, but I feel it to be rooted elsewhere. The individual shell, in which my personality is so solidly encased, explodes at the moment of Satori. Not necessarily that I get unified with a greater being than myself, or absorbed in it, but that my individuality, which I found rigidly held together and definitely kept separate from other individual existences, becomes loosened somehow from its tightening grip and melts away into something indescribable, something which is of quite a different order from what I am accustomed to. The feeling that follows is that of a complete release, or a complete rest. The feeling that one has arrived, finally, at the destination. Coming home and quietly resting is the expression generally used by Zen followers. The story of the prodigal son in the Sadharman Pundarika, in the Vajra Samadhi, and also in the New Testament, points to the same feeling one has at the moment of a Satori experience. Number 6, impersonal tone. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Zen experience is that it has no personal note in it, as is observable in Christian mystic experiences. There is no reference whatever in Buddhist Satori to such personal and frequently sexual feelings and relationships as are to be gleaned from these terms: flame of love, a wonderful love shed in the heart, embrace, the beloved, bride, bridegroom, spiritual matrimony, Father, God, the Son of God, God's child, etc. We may say that all these terms are interpretations based on a definite system of thought and really have nothing to do with the experience itself. At any rate, alike in India, China, and Japan, Satori has remained thoroughly impersonal, or rather highly intellectual. Is this owing to the peculiar character of Buddhist philosophy? Does the experience itself take its colors from the philosophy or theology? Whatever this is, there is no doubt that in spite of its having some points of similitude to the Christian mystic experience, the Zen experience is singularly devoid of personal or human colorings. Chao Pian, a great government officer of the Sung dynasty, was a lay disciple of Faxuan of Changshan. One day after his official duties were over, he found himself leisurely sitting in his office when all of a sudden a clash of thunder burst on his ear, and he realized a state of Satori. The poem he then composed depicts one aspect of the Zen experience. Devoid of thought, I sat quietly by the desk in my official room, with my fountain mind undisturbed, as serene as water. A sudden clash of thunder, the mind doors burst open, and lo, there sitteth the old man in all his homeliness. Number 7, feeling of exaltation. That this feeling inevitably accompanies Satori is due to the fact that it is the breaking up of the restriction imposed on one as an individual being. And this breaking up is not a mere negative incident, but quite a positive one, fraught with signification, because it means an infinite expansion of the individual. The general feeling, though we are not always conscious of it, which characterizes all our functions of consciousness, is that of restriction and dependence. Because consciousness itself is the outcome of two forces conditioning or restricting each other. Satori, on the contrary, essentially consists in doing away with the opposition of two terms in whatsoever sense. And this opposition is the principle of consciousness, as before mentioned, while Satori is to realize the unconscious, which goes beyond the opposition. To be released of this, therefore, must make one feel above all things intensely exalted. A wandering outcast, maltreated everywhere, not only by others, but by himself, finds that he is the possessor of all the wealth and power that is ever attainable in this world by a mortal being. If this does not give him a high feeling of self-glorification, what could? Says a Zen master. When you have Satori, you are able to reveal a palatial mansion made of precious stones on a single blade of grass. But when you have no Satori, a palatial mansion itself is concealed behind a simple blade of grass. Another Zen master, evidently alluding to the Avatamsaka, declares, O monks, lo and behold, a most auspicious light is shining with the utmost brilliancy all over the great Chiliocosm, simultaneously revealing all the countries, all the oceans, all the Sumerus, all the suns and moons, all the heavens, all the lands, each of which number as many as hundreds of thousands of kotis. O monks, do you not see the light? But the Zen feeling of exaltation is rather a quiet feeling of self-contentment. It is not at all demonstrative when the first glow of it passes away. The unconscious does not proclaim itself so boisterously in the Zen consciousness. Number 8, momentariness. Satori comes upon one abruptly and is a momentary experience. In fact, if it is not abrupt and momentary, it is not Satori. And this abruptness is what characterizes the Huineng school of Zen ever since its proclamation late in the 7th century. His opponent, Shen Sui, was insistent on a gradual unfoldment of Zen consciousness. Huineng's followers were thus distinguished as strong upholders of the doctrine of abruptness. This abrupt experience of Satori then opens up in one moment an altogether new, vista, and the whole existence is appraised from quite a new angle of observation. Practical methods of Zen instruction. As I conceive it, Zen is the ultimate fact of all philosophy and religion. Every intellectual effort must culminate in it, or rather must start from it, if it is to bear any practical fruits. Every religious faith must spring from it, if it has to prove at all efficiently and livingly workable in our active life. Therefore, Zen is not necessarily the fountain of Buddhist thought and life alone. It is also very much alive in Christianity, the Muslim faith, Taoism, and even in Confucianism. But what makes all these religious and philosophies vital and inspiring, keeping up their usefulness and efficiency, is due to the presence in them of what I may designate as the Zen element. Mere scholasticism will never create a living faith. Religion requires something inwardly compelling, energizing, and capable of doing work. The intellect is useful in its place, but when it tries to cover the whole field of religion, it dries up the source of life. Feeling or mere faith is so blind and will grasp anything that may come across and hold to it as the final reality. Fanaticism is vital enough as far as its explosiveness is concerned, but this is not a true religion, and its practical sequence is the destruction of the whole system, not to speak of the fate of its own being. Zen is what makes the religious feeling run through its legitimate channel and what gives life to the intellect. Zen does this by giving one a new point of view on things, a new way of appreciating the truth and beauty of life and the world, by discovering a new source of energy in the inmost recesses of consciousness, and by bestowing on one a feeling of completeness and sufficiency. That is to say, Zen works miracles by overhauling the whole system of one's inner life and opening up a world hitherto entirely unheard of. This may be called a resurrection, and Zen tends to emphasize the speculative element, though confessedly it opposes this